What's going on? BruceBeats here, and in this video I am going to show you how to arrange your loops in a professional and structured way so you don't have just beats. You actually have a full and structured song that takes the listener on a journey from beginning to end and is exciting and isn't too loopy, isn't so repetitive, and to have the perfect blend of repetition and variation so that you can structure your beats and have a workflow to do it so you don't get lost in how to develop it, how to structure it, how to arrange it, when to do this, when to do that, whatever it may be. If you like this video, hit the like button and subscribe for more. This is a recording of a coaching call that I did with producers that I mentor, and it was so valuable to them. I know it's going to be awesome for you. So without any further ado, let's get right into it.
Everybody's workflow is different, and also every track is different, but to put it in as much of a box as possible, this workflow is pretty much how tracks come to life, whether this takes a year or whether it's done in one night. What I like to call, and I've come to call, the core idea. You start with a core idea, whatever that is. Sometimes that's a melody, sometimes that's a chord progression, sometimes that's a drum groove, sometimes it's a melody and a chord progression, sometimes it's just a reference track. Well, actually that would maybe like step 0, because it's like, oh, I want to make something like this, right? But it starts with some sort of inception, right? And you start playing around with some notes and you're like, ooh, this is cool, and you start creating a loop or whatever it may be. And so the core idea could be a verse and a hook that's written just piano vocal, or it could be an 8-bar loop that has layers already. It has drums, bass, piano, synth, whatever, and it's kind of like a beat already. So whatever that core idea is. Then that core idea goes into development. And this is where we structure and arrange. So it's like, oh, I have this cool thing. Okay, now how am I going to turn it into a song? Or a beat, or a track, or an instrumental, or something that people would actually enjoy listening to, and it's not an 8-bar loop forever, because that gets boring by the 16th bar. So that's where we bring it into this stage. This is like the creative side of things. And then once we have that, we start to go into the mixing and the mastering portion. So these would be like the 3 overarching things. And then once we're here, we're done, right? But within this developmental stage, I actually want to talk about steps within. So here, some of the ways we do this is we can mock up the structure. So we can kind of get like, okay, I have this verse and now I want it to go to a hook, which it probably makes sense to come back into the verse, then another hook, and then a pre-hook, and I may even lay that out. I do that a lot. I'll lay out the entire track. Whether I do it physically in the DAW or I just kind of have it in my head and I'll put it on the notes on the side, I kind of have a mocked up structure. It may change as I do things because I'll hear it go somewhere else, but at least what it does is it gives me a roadmap to follow, and I'm not just guessing what's going to be coming next. And so I kind of have this big picture thing, and then I start to zoom in. So when I'm doing this big picture thing, I'm not worried about transitions. I'm not overly worried about ear candy or having verse 2 have the variation it needs to have or whatever. Like, I'm just kind of thinking about the structure. And then I start to zoom in, and this is where I start thinking about, making sections different, adding variation, exciting transitions, all the cool arrangement stuff, ear candy, all that stuff. And I guess I can say zoom into the details, because the details are what makes music exciting, right? The details are really what makes music exciting. Because think about it, you have an 8-bar loop, and if you just loop that, there's really no details in that. It's just the same thing. But if you start to loop that, and then you have these nuances of, this wouldn't be nuanced, but like dropping the kick for an entire 8 bars. Okay, that's something. Or slightly changing the kick pattern, or dropping out, or a slight nuance of dropping out the snare on 2, or dropping out the snare from 4, or maybe a whole measure there's no snare. Or, coming into the hook, we introduce another hi-hat, and it's 2 hi-hats and not just 1. Those little things, that's what makes it really exciting. Sometimes they're imperceivable if you're not really paying attention for it, but that's what makes the music exciting, especially to the layperson, and they don't even know it's happening. Super cool. But that's where we start to zoom into the details and make sections different and do all these things. I know I've been talking about like playing instruments, but this is also like where we're talking about the lyrics, writing the lyrics, stacking your background vocals. All of that is kind of the same thing. Like with background vocals, you're making them interesting. You're seeing how you can layer some nice harmonies, make them exciting. You're recording your vocals, all that stuff. And then once we have the entire track laid out, where from beginning to end, we can take a listen to it and be like, yeah, this is really cool. I really like this. It may not like everything is not balanced or anything like that. That's not the concern at all at this stage of the game. We're just trying to get our ideas out. We're like focused on the creation. From this point, once we feel like at least like 90% of our creation is done, like you have all the elements the way you want them to be, the track is developed in a strong way, then we come in and we start mixing it and we start mastering it and we start balancing, we start getting everything sitting right, we start EQing, all that stuff, and then we go into that. And then we have the whole 4-phase mix and master thing that I was talking about before. To recap, we start out with our core idea. Everybody starts out with an idea, right? Whatever that core idea may be. And then we go into the developmental phase. And inside of that developmental phase, it's really nice to start out with mocking up a structure, having a reference track, seeing how you want things to feel. And once you kind of have the big picture of what's happening with the track, then you zoom into the details with your different sections, your variations, having some exciting transitions, ear candy. And keep in mind that you can record something, you can lay something down, and it may completely change. And that's fine. Just because you lay an idea down doesn't mean it needs to stay that way, right? But sometimes it will. But sometimes we don't know what something's going to sound like until we actually do it. When I was working on Clouds Turn Gray, which is going to be my next release, this one is like a really elaborate arrangement. And what you hear in the song is about 20% of everything I wrote. Because about 80% of what I wrote, I trashed. And I don't remember it anymore, but I remember that it took me a whole week to write that freaking song. Because I was like, dude, I was wrecking my brain. I would write something and I'd be like, this is trash. I write it again, this is trash. And I kind of knew what this was. I knew what I wanted to do and what I was going for. I just wasn't getting it right. Wasn't getting the details right. I wrote so much and I trashed so much. And what you hear is the best 20% of what I came up with. And I'm happy with it. I'm very happy with it. So just food for thought. Happens to everybody. It's part of the process. And then you go into the mix and master. And then there's a whole video on that part. That's how I approach the creative process. We always want that build up to the end. The tracks that don't, you know, if you just like think about tracks that are really like super simple from beginning to end, and they're a lot of fun to listen to and whatever, they don't last very long. And you don't end up listening to them for a long period of time at all. You just liked it for a small time in your life. But tracks that you come back to again and again and again, and I say tracks, but more like songs, that you come back to again and again and again, you're like, man, this piece of music is incredible. It's because it does that. It takes you on a journey and it develops over time, and it's not the same thing all the time.